Picture a country where half the population legally doesn't exist. Not doesn't matter, not doesn't vote, doesn't exist. Under English law in the 1700s, the moment a woman married, she ceased to be a legal person. She couldn't own property, couldn't sign a contract, couldn't sue in court, couldn't keep her own wages. Her children didn't belong to her. Her body, technically, didn't belong to her. She was absorbed, folded into her husband like a letter into an envelope. The legal term for it was coverture, which is a word that comes from the Old French for covered, and that's exactly what it means. A married woman was covered, hidden, invisible to the law. Now, fill that invisible country with women who were, by every measurable standard, more literate, more socially fluent, more linguistically precise, and more strategically intelligent than most of the men who were busy legally erasing them. Add the fact that those women had been doing this for generations, that they had developed, across centuries of necessity, a parallel civilization of secrecy so sophisticated that it would make a modern intelligence agency weep with admiration. A civilization built into the seams of dresses, into the angle of a wrist holding a painted fan, into the seemingly innocent pages of a novel borrowed from a lending library, into the smell of invisible ink drying on paper that looked completely blank. That's 18th century England. Beautiful, brutal, glittering on the surface and rotting underneath, same as it always is. A place where a duchess could own nothing, and a seamstress could ruin a government minister with the right letter to the right person at the right moment. We're going there tonight, not as historians, not as observers with clipboards and footnotes. We're living it. One woman, one city, one network of secrets so finely woven, it took the British government 200 years to fully understand what had been happening under their noses. I make these history stories, and I genuinely can't tell if you listen to them to sleep or if you're all just extremely strange people who enjoy hearing about women hiding political correspondence inside their hairstyles while pretending to discuss embroidery. Either way, you're here. Get comfortable. Find whatever position you sleep in. Close your eyes if you want to. Here we go. Your eyes open to a ceiling you don't recognize. For exactly half a second, you've forgotten where you are. You're back in the village. You're in the narrow bed you shared with your sister for the first 17 years of your life. You can hear the geese outside. You can smell the bread your mother bakes before dawn. Then it hits you. The smell. Not bread. Not geese. Not the clean, cold smell of countryside morning. This smell is tallow candles burning down to their last inch, leaving a thick animal sweetness in the air. Coal smoke from the fireplaces 2 floors below that have been burning all night and need relighting before the household wakes. The faint, unmistakable scent of perfume. French, expensive, something your mistress wears, that has seeped into every curtain and cushion in this part of the house, and underneath all of it, the smell of London itself, which is, there's no polite way to say this, the smell of 500,000 people and their horses and their livestock and their refuse, all compressed into a few square miles along a river that also serves as a drain. You're not in the village anymore. You lie still for a moment. Catalogue in your body. Your back aches. The narrow cot in the attic room is nothing like the bed you'd imagined when you heard the word lady's maid. Your hands are cold. Your nose is cold. The single window above you shows a London sky the colour of a bruise. Not yet dawn, the lighter dirty grey that promises nothing pleasant. But you're here. You made it. You got the position through your aunt, who works in the kitchen of a house 3 streets away and knows everyone. You arrived 4 days ago with a trunk containing 3 dresses, your mother's Bible, a pair of good scissors, and enough nervousness to last a lifetime. Your name is Sarah Marsh. You're 18 years old, and you are now lady's maid to Mrs. Catherine Hartley, wife of Mr. Edmund Hartley, merchant of Grosvenor Street, London. This is 1752. You've been awake for 11 seconds and something is already wrong. The smell again, underneath the candles, underneath the coal smoke, underneath the perfume. There's something else. Something sharp and acrid that doesn't belong. Something chemical, almost medicinal. Burning paper, not the smell of a fireplace. Something smaller, more deliberate. You sit up. The cot creaks. The girl in the bed across from you, Mary, the housemaid, who has been here 3 years and regards you with the particular wariness of someone who has seen new staff come and go, doesn't stir. She's a deep sleeper. The rest of the household is still, quiet. You pull your shawl around your shoulders and move toward the door. The smell gets stronger as you descend the back stairs, not from the kitchen, from above. From Mrs. Hartley's dressing room, 1 floor down, where you sleep 1 floor above. You pause on the landing. The dressing room door is not quite closed. Through the gap, a thin line of candlelight. You should go back upstairs. You've been here 4 days. You don't know the rules yet. You don't know what's normal and what isn't. Maybe your mistress burns things every morning. Maybe this is entirely ordinary. Your hand touches the door, and then you hear it. Very soft. Almost nothing. The sound of someone breathing in a controlled, deliberate way. The way people breathe when they're trying very hard not to cry. You push the door open, just slightly, just enough to see. Mrs. Catherine Hartley is sitting at her writing desk in her nightgown, her dark hair loose around her shoulders. She's 31 years old, which you know because you were told before you arrived. She is by any objective measure a beautiful woman, dark-eyed, fine-boned, the kind of face that costs money to maintain and doesn't entirely hide its intelligence even when it tries. Right now, she's holding a piece of paper over the flame of her candle. She's burning a letter. She watches it catch. She watches the flame travel from corner to corner, blackening and curling the paper. She doesn't let go until the very last moment, until the flame reaches her fingers, and then she drops it onto the small metal plate she's using as a shield and watches the final corner turn to ash. Then she looks up, and she sees you. A silence that lasts about 3 years, during which every possible version of your future employment seems to collapse simultaneously. Then Mrs. Hartley does something unexpected. She doesn't shout. She doesn't dismiss you. She doesn't pretend nothing was happening. She looks at you for a long moment, her dark eyes, measuring, assessing, calculating. "Close the door," she says, very quietly, very evenly. You step inside. You close the door. "What's your name?" "The new girl." "Sarah, ma'am, Sarah Marsh." "How long have you been at this door?" "I only just arrived, ma'am. I smelled..." You hesitate. "I smelled something. I was worried there was a fire." A pause. "Were you?" She says it like a statement, not a question. She tilts her head, studying you the way you might study a piece of fabric you're considering buying. "And what did you see, Sarah?" You think carefully. "I saw you at your desk, ma'am, working by candlelight, as ladies do." Another pause, longer this time. The ash on the metal plate is still faintly glowing. The smell of burned paper fills the small room. Mrs. Hartley looks back down at the plate, at the ash, at whatever words are now gone forever. "My last lady's maid," she says conversationally, like she's discussing the weather, "was dismissed without a reference. She had very poor eyesight, could barely see her hand in front of her face. I understand, ma'am. I imagine that's very difficult for a lady's maid. All that fine work, needlework, reading labels, identifying things at a distance. Very difficult, ma'am." She looks at you again. "Go back upstairs, Sarah. We'll begin properly at 6. You go back upstairs. You lie on your cot in the dark attic room and listen to London waking up outside. The horses, the vendors, the church bells beginning their first count of the morning, and you understand that something has just begun. You're not entirely sure what. But you understand that your employment here is going to be more complicated than dressing hair. Let me explain what a lady's maid actually is in 1752, because it's not what you might think. It's not just a servant, or rather, it's not only a servant. The relationship between a woman of means and her lady's maid is something more intimate and more complicated than almost any other relationship either of them will have. She dresses you, she does your hair, she helps you in and out of stays, which are boned, structured undergarments that require another pair of hands to lace properly, and that, once laced, essentially reshape your entire torso. She knows every inch of your body, every scar, every mark, every physical fact about you that you'd rather keep private. She carries your correspondence. She delivers your messages. She sits with you in the carriage. She sleeps outside your chamber door when you're unwell. She keeps your schedule, your appointments, your medications, your secrets. She is, if you choose her correctly, the most loyal and the most useful and the most trusted person in your life. She is also, if she isn't loyal, the most dangerous. Mrs. Hartley dismissed the last one. You are, you realise over the first several weeks, on a very long and very carefully administered test. The test happens in small moments. A letter left just slightly visible, on the desk when you come in to lay out the morning dress. A conversation conducted within your earshot that might be significant or might be entirely meaningless. A question asked so casually it barely registers as a question at all. "Do you read, Sarah?" "Yes, ma'am. My mother taught me." "Novels?" "The Bible, mostly. And my mother had some improving pamphlets." A small pause. Mrs. Hartley examines her reflection in the looking-glass while you pin her hair. "What about French? Do you have any French?" "A little, ma'am. A very little." "We'll work on that." That's how the lessons begin. Not announced, not formal. Just a word here, a phrase there. French vocabulary worked into the morning routine. The names of colours, fabrics, perfumes, gradually and then faster. Grammar, irregular verbs, the particular French that's used in correspondence versus the French that's used in conversation. You learn other things too. You learn which of the household staff gossip and to what degree their gossip can be trusted. You learn that the cook is loyal but incurious. She minds her pots and her pastries and has no interest in anything beyond the kitchen. You learn that the footman, Thomas, has ambitions above his station and watches everything with too much attention. You learn that Mary, the housemaid who sleeps across from you in the attic, is kind but not careful. She means well but doesn't think before she speaks. You learn slowly the geography of the house, which rooms have connecting doors, which floorboards creak and which don't, where the sound travels and where it doesn't, and you learn, above all, to watch your mistress. Mrs. Hartley is a woman who rarely wastes a word. She is precise in everything, in conversation, in instruction, in the particular angle at which she holds her head when she wants you to understand that the subject is closed. She is not unkind, but she is not soft. She was educated well, languages, music, histories, and she wears that education the way she wears her clothes, with careful attention to how it appears and with the constant awareness that it isn't entirely hers to keep. This is 1752. She is a married woman. Legally she is covered. Everything she knows, everything she owns, everything she does. Her husband could take it, limit it, or simply erase it, and the law would nod and look away. You learn to read the particular quality of her stillness when Mr. Hartley is in the room, the way her sentences shorten, the way the light goes out of her eyes a little, the way a candle dims when you put your hand too close to it. He is not a cruel man, Mr. Hartley. That's what makes it so ordinary and so endless. He's not cruel. He's just entirely, absolutely certain that everything in this house, including his wife, belongs to him. And she has built a whole civilization inside the space he doesn't bother to look at. It takes you 6 weeks to get your first real invitation inside it. You're helping Mrs. Hartley dress for an evening engagement, some assembly or other, a gathering at a house in Bedford Square, and you're working through her fan collection, trying to find the ivory one she prefers when she stops you. Not that one, the painted one, the pastoral scene. You find it. It's a folding fan, brisée style. The sticks carved ivory and the leaf painted with an elaborate scene of shepherds and shepherdesses in an improbably clean and pleasant countryside. The painting is fine work. The whole object is about 10 inches when open. The smell of it is faint powder and something floral, cedarwood maybe from the box it's kept in. You hand it to her. She opens it, closes it, opens it again. "Do you know what this says?" she asks. "Says, ma'am? What I'm communicating right now with this." She holds the fan open, covers her left cheek with it, and looks at you over the top of the painted countryside. You shake your head. "Come here." You come to stand beside her. She holds the fan out, closed in her right hand, the tip resting on her right cheek. This means yes. She shifts it to the left cheek, still closed. This means no. She opens the fan wide, holds it in front of her face, eyes visible above. This means follow me. She drops the fan to hang from her wrist. This means we are being watched. Do not approach. She opens the fan halfway, holds it against her lips. This means I need to speak to you privately. She snaps the fan shut. This means I am done with this conversation and do not address me further on this subject. You stand very still. The candles in the dressing room cast a warm and jumping light. Outside, London goes about its evening business. The rattle of carriages on the cobblestones, the shout of a linkman advertising his torch, the distant bell of a church marking the quarter hour. How many signals are there, you ask? Dozens, different between different circles, different between different cities. The Spanish women have their own, the Italian women have theirs. She turns to the looking glass, examines her reflection. The basic grammar is fairly consistent across Europe, though the vocabulary varies. A fan closed quickly and tapped twice against the palm. That's impatience, frustration. A fan waved slowly, I am married. A fan waved quickly, I am engaged or otherwise unavailable. A fan held to the heart, you have my full attention. A fan drawn across the forehead, she pauses, means we are being observed. Be very careful. Who knows all this? Every woman at the assembly tonight. Every woman at every assembly of this kind from here to Vienna. She meets your eyes in the mirror, every woman, and essentially no men. She lets that settle. Men see fans as decorative, as frivolous, objects of vanity that their wives carry to look graceful. They've never thought to learn the language because they're quite certain there isn't one. A very small smile we've never corrected. Them. This is the first real lesson. Let me tell you about fans, because it's one of those things where if you explained it to most people in 2024, they'd think you were being fanciful. But this is entirely, absolutely documented historical fact. The fan language, la langue des éventails, the Spanish called it lenguaje de abanicos, was real, is documented, has been studied by historians who spent careers piecing together the specific codes from letters, diaries, paintings, and fashion guides of the period. It started most likely in Spain in the 16th century, when the spread of a fan to cover the face during church services was the only way a woman could signal anything to anyone without being observed. It evolved. It spread across Europe with the expansion of trade and the movement of courts. By the mid-18th century, it was operating as a fully functional parallel communication system at every formal social gathering from London to St. Petersburg. The man standing across the room from his wife at a party had absolutely no idea that she was telling her friend, through 3 precise movements of a painted ivory object, that the man to his left was the one who'd been embezzling from his own company for 2 years and should not be trusted with money under any circumstances. He was watching her talk to the hostess about the weather. He was watching her be decorative. This is one of the things that makes the history of women in the 18th century simultaneously tragic and astonishing. The constraints were so total, so absolute, that they became generative. When you can't speak plainly, you develop a language of indirection so sophisticated that it outpaces the plain language by several degrees of precision. The fan is only the beginning. 3 days after the fan lesson, you're in Mrs. Hartley's dressing room doing the morning task you now do every day without instruction, checking, cleaning, and when necessary repairing the wardrobe. This is actually your favourite part of the work. Not because you love fashion, though the clothes here are extraordinary compared to anything you've ever handled. Silk and brocade and damask, colours that cost more per yard than your mother earned in a month. But because in the examination and care of the wardrobe you learn things. The evening gown that had to be let out and then taken in again within 2 months, and what that tells you about a woman's health. The morning dress that is washed more carefully than the others and put away with more care, and what that might mean. The shoes, the gloves, the accessories, all of them tell stories if you learn to read them. Today you're working through the petticoats. There are 6 of them, several white cotton for everyday wear, 2 quilted for winter, 1 silk for formal occasions. You're checking the seams, looking for weaknesses, noting which ones need reinforcement. The silk one is on the table when you find it. A pocket, not a regular pocket. Those exist. Women's skirts of the period often have pairs of hanging pockets, separate pieces accessed through vertical slits in the outer skirt layer, tied around the waist underneath. Every woman has them. They're large and deep and functional. You've already noted the ones in Mrs. Hartley's wardrobe. This is different. This is sewn directly into the waistband, invisible from the outside, invisible from the inside unless you know to look. Accessible only by pushing your fingers into a seam that appears closed but isn't, a false seam, each stitch close enough together to look sealed but spaced just wide enough to admit a folded piece of paper. You sit there for a moment, holding the petticoat, feeling the construction of this thing. The stitching is fine, much finer than the rest of the garment. Someone spent time on this, someone who knew exactly what they were doing. It's called a cash pocket, says Mrs. Hartley from the doorway. You didn't hear her come in. You hold very still. The French term, though women in England have been making them just as long. She comes to stand beside you, looks down at the petticoat in your hands. Feel the construction, both sides of the seam. You run your fingertips along the false seam. On one side, close regular stitching that appears solid. On the other side, an irregular interval. Every fourth or fifth stitch slightly looser, slightly longer. The difference is so small you'd miss it entirely unless you were looking very carefully. How many fingers? She asks. You try to push 2 fingers into the seam, they go through. 2 fingers, ma'am. That's the measurement for a standard folded letter. Single sheet, twice folded, 4 panels. It fits exactly. She tilts her head, though I have 3 skirts with larger ones, depending on the size of the document. How many skirts? Altogether, she considers. In active use 4. I have others in reserve. She pauses. How many letters can you fit in a standard hidden pocket without a visible change in silhouette? You think about this. The depth of the seam, the thickness of folded paper. 3 or 4, perhaps. 2 comfortably. 3 if they're single sheets. 4 changes the line of the skirt, and any woman would notice immediately. A beat. Any woman, I said. Men don't look at the line of a woman's skirt in a useful way. They either look with interest or they don't look at all. Neither observation serves them in a practical capacity. This is the second lesson. Let me tell you about pockets, because they're one of the great undiscussed injustices of the 18th century, and also one of its greatest technical achievements. In the early 1700s, men had pockets, lots of them, built into every garment, coats, waistcoats, breeches, visible, accessible, capacious. This was normal because men were assumed to have things to carry: money, watches, papers, letters of business. Men moved through the world requiring pockets. Women had pockets too, but they were external, tied on. Separate garments accessed through slits. They were practical for carrying household necessities, keys, a small purse, a handkerchief, perhaps a small prayer book. But around the 1790s, fashion changed. The silhouette slimmed. The tied-on external pocket started making visible lumps under lighter fabrics. And, gradually, then completely, women's clothing moved toward the idea that women didn't need to carry things, that carrying things was unfeminine, that the handbag, the reticule, the tiny decorative pouch that could hold almost nothing useful was sufficient. This was not an accident. A man who carries things in his pockets controls what he carries. A woman who carries nothing is legible, transparent, available for inspection. The women of the 18th century who needed to carry secrets had to build those pockets themselves. The hidden seam pocket, the cash pocket, the false hem with the hollow channel, the hollowed heel of a shoe, more on that later, the space within a coiled hairstyle, the hidden compartment in a travelling case, the innocent-looking sewing case with a false bottom. Every woman in this neighbourhood, Mrs. Hartley says, who has any understanding of her situation, has some version of what you're holding in your hands right now. What do you carry in yours, you ask? You're not sure if it's too forward, but she doesn't pull back. That depends on the day, she says. Usually a letter waiting to be delivered. Sometimes a letter I've received that I'm not yet finished with. Sometimes a document I need to keep away from eyes that would find it useful. Your husband's eyes. She meets yours. Among others. In September of your first year in service, Mrs. Hartley sends you out with a letter, not an unusual request. Ladies' maids run errands. That's part of the role. You go to the milliners, to the mercers, to various shopkeepers with lists and instructions and payments. You fetch things. You deliver things. But this letter is different. You know it before she even hands it to you because of the weight of it. Not heavier than a normal letter, if anything slightly lighter, but the way she holds it before placing it in your hand, like it matters. The address is on the outer fold, she says. You'll take it to the penny post office on St. Martin's Lane. Not the receiving house, the office itself. You'll ask for the afternoon collection and see that it goes in. Not by hand, you ask, not delivered directly. She shakes her head. The penny post is safer for this particular letter. Let me explain why this is interesting. The London penny post was established in 1680 by a merchant named William Dockwra, who had a vision of an efficient urban mail system. By 1752, it has been running, with various modifications and a period of government takeover, for over 70 years. For a single penny, a letter can be sent to any address within the London area, collected and delivered multiple times per day. For women who needed to send correspondence that didn't pass through their husband's study first, the penny post is a revelation. A letter sent by private hand, through a servant, through a friend, can be traced. Someone carried it from here to there. Someone's footsteps create a path. A letter sent through the penny post becomes one of thousands. It enters the flow of the city's daily correspondence and loses its origin. By the time it arrives at its destination, the chain of hands between sender and recipient is essentially invisible. This is not by accident. Women of Mrs. Hartley's class and situation have understood this for decades. The penny post office, to an observer, is entirely neutral. Both sexes use it. All classes use it. A lady's maid delivering a letter to the receiving house on St. Martin's Lane looks like exactly what she is. A servant running a household errand. What she's actually doing is carrying a political document across the city in a silk petticoat pocket, slipping it into the daily current of London's mail, and thereby making it effectively untraceable. You walk to St. Martin's Lane on a grey October morning. London in October 1752 smells like coal smoke so thick it stings the back of your throat. Fallen leaves being crushed under cartwheels into a dark mulch that mixes with the usual mud and horse dung and general effluent of the streets. Roasting chestnuts from a vendor near the church of St. Martin in the Fields, whose smell you will associate ever after with cold air and the slightly vertiginous feeling of doing something you don't entirely understand. The streets are loud and crowded and utterly indifferent to you. This is both frightening and useful. You've been in London for 3 months now. You know the basic geography, the great westy sweep of Oxford Street and its tributaries, the fan of Soho streets, the formal grid of the new Mayfair development where Grosvenor Street sits. You know which streets are navigable and which become impassable with carts at certain hours. You know to walk close to the buildings to avoid the constant splash of mud from passing wheels. But you're still a country girl in a city. You still feel the scale of it as a physical pressure sometimes. The weight of all those lives, all those buildings, all that noise pressing in from every direction. You make it to St. Martin's Lane. The penny post receiving house is easy to find. A board outside marks it, and there's a small constant flow of people in and out. Servants, tradespeople, a few women of the merchant class who come in person. A boy, maybe 12, with a stack of letters tied with string, delivering in bulk. You join the small queue, hand over the letter, watch it disappear into the afternoon collection. That's it. That's all. And yet, you feel it. Walking back, the letter gone from your pocket and the cash pocket flat and empty against your hip. You feel that something real happened there. Something moved, not fabric, not paper, something actual. It takes you another 2 months to learn what was in the letter, and by then you'll understand why it had to travel the way it did. Here is a fact about 1752 London that seems impossible until you learn the context. The city is running, at any given moment, approximately 3,000 coffee houses. 3,000! This is not an exaggeration. It's a figure derived from contemporary surveys, tax records, and the slightly dazed observations of foreign visitors who kept noting, with obvious bewilderment, that you can't walk 20 yards in central London without finding someone offering to sell you a small clay cup of hot brown liquid for a penny. These coffee houses are not cafes in the modern sense. They're information exchanges, newspapers, gossip, business, the prices of commodities, the movements of ships, the health of distant monarchs, the likelihood of war, the probability that a particular merchant will pay his debts, who's sleeping with whose wife. Everything passes through the coffee houses. They are, in a real and functional sense, the nervous system of the city, and you cannot go in one. Not you, specifically, Sarah Marsh, lady's maid to Mrs. Catherine Hartley of Grosvenor Street. Any woman. Women are not admitted to London's coffee houses. This is not a written rule. There's no law against it. But the convention is so total that it might as well be carved in stone above every door. Women, the understanding goes, would disrupt the serious business atmosphere. Women would bring domestic considerations into commercial discourse. Women would, the most cutting dismissal, distract the men. Never mind that the women being excluded include the wives, daughters, and mothers of the men doing the business in question. Never mind that they often know more about the relevant commercial details than anyone in the room. Never mind any of that. You stand outside Lloyd's coffee house on Lombard Street one afternoon, waiting for a message your mistress has asked you to collect from a gentleman she knows, a business associate of her husband's who's agreed to pass something to her through you, and you look at the door. The sound coming from inside is the hum of the city's commerce, voices, the rattle of cups, someone reading aloud from a newspaper, the scraping of chairs. Inside that building, men are making decisions that affect thousands of lives. The shipping company whose cargo your mistress's hidden pocket correspondence concerns. The insurance underwriters whose terms determine whether a voyage is viable. The merchants who set the price of goods that will travel 20,000 miles to reach London, and you're on the street, waiting. A man exits, nearly walks into you, looks through you the way you look through a window and walks on. The message does arrive eventually, and the associate sends a boy out with this, a plain folded paper which you put in your pocket and carry home. But you stand there for a moment longer, in front of Lloyd's door, in the October cold, and you understand something that you couldn't have quite articulated when you left the village. The exclusion isn't incidental, it's structural. It isn't that the men in these coffee houses are individually hostile to women. Some of them probably have perfectly warm feelings toward their wives and daughters. It's that the information economy of the city depends, in a specific way, on women not having access to certain kinds of information. Because if women had that access, they'd use it. And if they used it, they'd have power. And if they had power, well, that's the problem, isn't it? So instead, Instead, you go to the tea table. Mrs. Hartley hosts what she calls a small entertainment twice a month, a gathering of 6 to 8 women in her drawing room, afternoon tea and coffee served, conversation that to an observer might seem entirely devoted to domestic and social matters. The curtains are drawn. The footman, Thomas the watchful one, is kept busy in the kitchen on invented errands. Mary the housemaid serves and is in and out, never long enough in the room to follow a complete conversation. You are in the room, you pour, you refill, you become, like all good ladies' maids at such gatherings, almost invisible, and you listen. The women in this room include Lady Forsyth, whose husband is on the board of a trading company, and who therefore knows which voyages are financially sound and which are not. Mrs. Pemberton, who is the sister of a member of Parliament, and who visits her brother's household often enough to hear things. Mrs. Graves, whose previous husband was a solicitor, and who understands legal language better than most barristers currently practising. Miss Fenn, who is 34 and unmarried, and teaches mathematics and natural philosophy to the daughters of wealthy families, which means she's in and out of 12 different households a week and hears everything. They talk about the weather, fashion, music, their children's health, a new novel that 3 of them have been reading. They also talk about the impending collapse of a credit arrangement that involves 4 of their husbands. A piece of legislation currently before Parliament that, if it passes in its current form, will make it easier for a man to separate his wife from her personal correspondence. The recent arrest of a man named William Bowen on charges that, on examination, look considerably less solid than the magistrate was led to believe. They know these things because they talk to each other, because they are the women who fill the houses where the business happens, because the servants talk to other servants, because the wives talk to each other in rooms that men consider safe enough to speak freely in, because the daughters overhear things and tell their mothers, because the ladies' maids, you, are the transmission mechanism of a network so diffuse and so embedded in the ordinary social fabric that it is essentially invisible to anyone looking for something that looks like a network. When the last guest leaves at 5 o'clock and you're gathering the cups, Mrs. Hartley catches your eye. "What did you hear?" she asks. Not, "Did you hear anything?" "What did you hear?" The difference matters. You tell her. She listens carefully, asks 2 clarifying questions, and then nods once, definitively, in the way that means the conversation is over but the information is filed. "Good," she says, "just that." But it feels, standing there with a cup of cold tea in each hand, like a door opening. October becomes November. The drawing-room window frosts overnight. Your morning breath clouds in the attic air. Mrs. Hartley keeps a modest library, 2 shelves of volumes in her dressing room, mostly novels and some poetry, 1 shelf of improving religious works that she almost never touches. The novels are borrowed and exchanged among her circle constantly. Fielding, Richardson, Smollett, Clarissa, which is 8 volumes long, and about which Mrs. Hartley has some sharp observations. Tom Jones, which she finds more interesting in practice than in theory. 1 novel doesn't circulate. It sits on the 2nd shelf, 3rd from the right, between a French grammar and a small devotional text. The Fortunate Mistress by Daniel Defoe, published 1724. The spine is cracked with use. The pages are fine, thinner than usual, which allows more text per page. "Take it down," Mrs. Hartley says one evening, when you've finished your other work and the house is quiet. You take it down. It's heavier than it looks. Or maybe you're just being careful. Open to page 43. You open to page 43. The pages smell of old paper and something faintly acidic. The paper itself aging, the ink setting more deeply with each passing decade. Find the third word. On the 6th line, you find it. The word is night, ma'am. No, it's the number 43, 363. That's the code notation. Page, line, word position. What's the third word on line 6, page 43? Night. Good. Now find page 91, line 12, first word. Carried. Page 107, line 4, word 5. Through. You look up, she's watching you. Night. Carried. Through, you say. 3 words from a book that we both own the same edition of. 3 words that could mean anything or nothing, written in a letter as 3 sets of numbers. Page, line, position, that to anyone who doesn't have the book look like a set of household accounts or a recipe or nothing at all. She pauses. The message night, carried through, means that a particular document was transported overnight successfully and is now in safe hands. But you can encode almost anything this way, using the full vocabulary of the text. This is the book cipher. It's old. Very old. Mary, Queen of Scots, used a version of it, though hers was considerably more elaborate. The principle is simple. If you and your correspondent both own the exact same edition of the same book, same publisher, same date, same page layout, then you can send messages using only numbers, which are meaningless without the key. The key is the book. The beautiful thing in an 18th century context is that women own books. Novels, in particular, are coded as feminine property. A man rifling through his wife's correspondence who finds a letter that appears to discuss page numbers would almost certainly assume it was some kind of lending library notation. An amateur literary discussion. Nothing important. How do you decide which edition, you ask? If someone else has the book but a different printing, you give the book in person. You present it as a gift or a loan, or simply place it in your correspondent's hands at a gathering with a look that indicates its significance. She pauses. It's one of the reasons the novel became so important to women in this period. Men saw the rise of the novel as a feminine weakness, sentimental, decorative, the reading of stories as a substitute for real intellectual engagement. They never looked closely enough at what we were doing with the books. She closes the Defoe. There are 3 other women in London who have the same copy of this edition. I identified each copy myself at the printer's warehouse 6 years ago, checking page layouts against my own to ensure identical formatting. 6 years ago. I was 25. I had been married for 2 years. She replaces the book on the shelf, precisely 3rd from the right. I was beginning to understand the nature of my situation. Now for the chemistry. One Tuesday afternoon, Mrs. Hartley has you help her with what she describes as some correspondence preparation. The tools laid out on her writing desk are a quill, a standard inkwell, containing the usual black iron gall ink, a separate small dish containing a pale liquid that smells faintly of something you can't quite identify, a sheet of plain white paper, and a second sheet already written on in the ordinary way, what appears to be a perfectly normal letter to a cousin in Bath. Sympathetic ink, she says. You'll have heard of it. Only vaguely, ma'am. The Romans used it. Pliny describes it. Ovid writes about it. In the 16th century, Giambattista della Porta wrote a book called Magia Naturalis, Natural Magic, in which he described 17 different formulas. She picks up the quill, dips it in the pale liquid. The principle is simple. Some substances are naturally invisible when applied to paper. They become visible only when treated, heated, or treated with a reagent, a responding chemical substance. She writes on the plain white paper. You watch her hand move. The quill leaves nothing visible behind, no mark, no trace. She writes, in lines, as if writing a letter, but the paper looks entirely blank. This one is lemon juice, she says, completely standard. The juice squeezed from half a lemon, diluted slightly with water, dries invisible. To read it, you hold the paper near a heat source, a candle flame at a safe distance or a hot iron. The organic compounds in the juice darken when heated. The writing appears. She sets the paper aside to dry. The letter to my cousin, the visible letter, discusses the weather and my health, and her upcoming confinement. All perfectly true, all perfectly unremarkable. She picks up the letter to Bath. This letter will be sent folded in thirds. The invisible writing is on a separate sheet that will be folded inside. The outside sheet, if examined by anyone, is only a letter to a cousin. And the inside sheet appears blank, is blank to anyone who examines it without knowing what to look for. She looks at you. Heat reveals everything. The phrase works. Literally and philosophically, she hands you the quill and the dish of lemon juice. Try. Your first attempt is terrible. You hold the quill too loosely and the juice pools where it shouldn't and doesn't flow where it should. You can see almost nothing, only a faint wet trail that you can track because you know you made it, and even then only at a certain angle in certain light. Better, she says, though it isn't. Again. Your second attempt is worse. You're overcompensating now, pressing too hard, barely dipping the quill. The sensation you're looking for, she says, watching your hand, is the same as writing with a pen in ordinary use, but without the feedback of seeing ink appear. You have to internalize the rhythm of writing by the feel of the quill against the paper, by the muscle memory of it, not by looking. You try again. Your third attempt is recognizable. You've written good morning, which isn't particularly covert information, but the letters form properly and the pressure is even, and the juice dries in even trails. The paper must be held level while it dries, she says, or the juice moves with gravity, and the liquid ratio matters. Too concentrated, and there's a subtle sheen to the dry paper that a careful observer might notice. Too diluted, and the heating process destroys the compound before it has time to darken visibly. How did you learn the ratio? Trial and error. I ruined a good deal of paper initially. She pauses. There are more complex formulas, substances that require a specific reagent rather than heat, which makes them more secure, because even if someone applies heat and nothing appears, they might conclude the paper is innocent when in fact it requires a different revealing method. Milk works similarly to lemon juice, though the smell is less pleasant. Vinegar, certain plant juices, onion juice is excellent, very reliable. Though the smell while drying can be detected, she picks up the now dry plain sheet and holds it near the candle. Gradually, beautifully, in the warming light, your words appear. Good morning. The letters show dark brown against the cream of the paper. Not perfectly regular. Your writing, untrained in this medium, wobbles slightly, but readable. Clear. Good, she says. You stare at the words appearing from nothing. How long does it last, you ask? The writing, once revealed. The marks are permanent once heat is applied, which is why you reveal a letter only when you're ready to read and destroy it. You don't reveal it and then put it away. She holds the paper to the candle's flame directly now, and the good morning chars and blackens and curls, and the paper catches, and she drops it on the small metal plate. The same metal plate you saw that first morning. That's what you burn, you say. That's what you burn, she agrees. By December, you know enough to know you don't know enough. You can read a fan. You can find a hidden pocket by touch. You can write in lemon juice with reasonable consistency. You understand the book cipher, in principle if not yet in fluency. You know which women in London's middling and upper middle class are part of whatever network this is, or adjacent to it, or aware of it. But you still don't know what it's for. The question sits in the back of your mind during the morning routines, during the afternoon errands, during the evening gatherings. You're being trusted incrementally. Each lesson is given when she's decided you're ready. The pace is hers, not yours. And then, in the second week of December, she tells you, you're working late. The house is very quiet. Mr. Hartley is at his club, which is where he spends most evenings, and the household staff have finished their work for the day. Mrs. Hartley is at her desk, not burning anything tonight, just sitting, and the light from the single candle catches her in a way that makes her look younger and also somehow very tired. Sit down, Sarah. You sit. The dressing room stool, your usual seat when she talks to you seriously. I'm going to tell you something, she says, that I would advise you never to repeat to anyone outside this room who is not already aware of it. Not because I would dismiss you, but because the information itself carries consequences for other people, and you would be protecting them as well as me. Yes, ma'am. She's quiet for a moment. You know that the Jacobite rising was crushed in 1745 and 1746. The battle at Culloden, the Duke of Cumberland, the aftermath. Yes, ma'am, Prince Charles Edward Stuart, the last attempt to restore the Stuart line. The last military attempt, she says carefully. The Stuart cause did not end at Culloden. It went underground. It became correspondence rather than cannon. Money moved in ways that looked like commerce. Documents moved in ways that looked like personal letters. Certain people maintained the position that the king in exile retained a legitimate claim, and that the legal instruments by which the Hanoverians hold the throne are imperfect, and they maintained that position quietly, and they communicated it to each other quietly, and they waited. A pause. My father was one of those people. The candle doesn't move. London outside continues to be London. A coach on the street below. The distant bark of a dog. He died when I was 12, but his correspondents did not die with him. His correspondents, some of them, maintained connections with me. Carefully, over years, through my marriage to a man who has, for his own reasons, Hanoverian sympathies. She looks at you directly. The connections are not active in any operational sense. I'm not organizing anything. I'm not involved in any plan. What I maintain is a channel of communication, a set of relationships, certain documents that pass through my hands on the way between people who cannot themselves correspond directly. You're a go-between, you say. I'm what they used to call a courrier de cabinet, a cabinet courier. One of many women performing the same function, because women can move through certain social spaces that men cannot without attracting attention, and because women's correspondence is, in general, assumed to be harmless. She looks at her hands on the desk. The letters that have been passing through this house for the past 6 years are, for the most part, financial. Details of how certain sums of money have been moved. Records of property arrangements. Occasionally political intelligence. Assessments of who in Parliament might be sympathetic to certain arguments if approached correctly. She pauses. Nothing explosive, nothing that will topple a government, but information that matters to people who have staked their lives in the previous generation on a political position that the British state considers treasonous. Treasonous. The word sits in the room like something cold. If your husband found the letters, he would burn them and forbid me contact with those involved, and that would be the end of it. He has no interest in involving authorities. She pauses. He is not a passionate man in any direction. He would consider it an embarrassing nuisance and a threat to his business reputation, and he would make it stop. And if authorities found the letters, that is why the letters are written in lemon juice, inside hidden pockets, in cipher, a beat. That is why I tested you for 6 weeks before telling you this. That is why the previous lady's maid was dismissed, because she made a comment, an innocent comment, she didn't understand what she was saying, to Thomas the footman, who has, I have since learned, a brother who works as a clerk to one of the Bow Street magistrates, Thomas, the watchful one. Does he know anything? Thomas knows what servants know, which is significant but context-free. He knows I send letters by the penny post. He knows women visit this house twice a month. He knows I keep books in my dressing room. A slight wry movement of the mouth. None of which is illegal, most of which is entirely unremarkable. The information only becomes dangerous if someone knows what to look for, and for that they would need to know considerably more than Thomas can tell them. But they might be looking. They might be looking, she agrees, which is why it matters very much that nothing unusual happens, that the house runs normally, that the routines continue, that a new lady's maid who has been in position for several months appears, to any outside observer, to be learning her trade and doing her work and going about her days without any particular excitement. She looks at you. Can you do that, Sarah? And there it is, the actual question, the thing the whole 6 weeks of testing has been building toward. Not can you keep a secret. You've already proven that, more or less. Not are you competent. She wouldn't have kept you if you weren't. But can you be normal? Can you be so thoroughly, convincingly, unremarkably ordinary that someone watching this house will see nothing worth reporting? Yes, ma'am, you say. She nods once. Good. Then I'll start teaching you the cipher properly. Here I need to stop the story for a few minutes, because what Mrs. Hartley is doing is real, and the network she's part of is real, and the methods she uses are not exceptional or unique. They are part of a whole tradition. Women have been carrying political intelligence, maintaining covert correspondence, and operating as information couriers across Europe for centuries. By the 1700s, this has been happening long enough that there are conventions, established methods, things that work and things that don't, a kind of informal, unwritten curriculum that passes from one generation of women to the next because the need for it never goes away. Let me tell you about some specific women. Lady Henrietta Jacobite correspondence, 1715 to 1745. In the decades before, and during the Jacobite risings, the networks of women who maintained correspondence with the Stuart court in exile in France, and later in Rome, were extensive enough to alarm the British government, which periodically seized correspondence and arrested couriers, and was frequently frustrated by how difficult it was to prove intent when the letters were in cipher or invisible ink or both. One woman, a Scottish countess whose name historians have spent considerable effort trying to establish with certainty, maintained an active correspondence across the English Channel for over 20 years, using a combination of 3 methods: invisible ink, book cipher, and what she called the plain method, which was hiding documents inside the lining of items shipped as legitimate commercial goods. Bolts of French fabric, barrels of wine, a particularly fine harpsichord, whose hollow body transported a complete set of military maps before the 1715 rising. She was never caught. The hollow heel. This one is almost too baroque to believe, but it's documented. The heeled shoe of the 18th century, particularly for women of means who wore higher, more decorated heels, has a structure that allows for modification. A skilled cobbler or a woman with good tools and patience could hollow out the wooden core of a heel, creating a space approximately 2 inches by 1 inch and 3/4 of an inch deep. Enough for a tightly rolled piece of thin paper. Enough for a folded document small enough to carry across a border. How do you walk normally on a heel with a hollow core? Carefully. How do you remove the document? There are various methods. The cleanest involves a false base to the heel, held by 2 specific screws that can be turned by the point of a particular pin worn in the hair. Speaking of which, the hair. Women's hairstyles of the mid to late 18th century were extraordinary structures. The powder, the padding, the pins, the architecture of it. A formal coiffure of the 1750s to 1780s could be a foot or more above the head. The structures required a kind of internal framework, wadding, wire, false hair pieces, paste, flour, animal fat, that was built over several hours and in some fashionable extremes maintained for days or weeks before being entirely dismantled. Inside these structures you could hide things, not large things, but thin paper, tightly rolled, slid into the centre of a hairpiece, was invisible. Physically invisible. You'd have to take the entire construction apart to find it. Invisible also in the sense that no man of the period would voluntarily engage with the process of dismantling a woman's hairstyle. It was a domestic operation entirely beneath notice. The joke at the time, and it was a genuine joke repeated in various forms, was that the fashion for elaborate hairstyles had been invented by women who needed to carry documents. There's no evidence this is literally true, but the fact that the joke existed suggests an awareness of the practice. Lydia Darrah. Jump forward 30 years. From 1752, London, to 1777, Philadelphia, because the story of Lydia Darrah is too good not to tell. Lydia Darrah is a Quaker housewife. She is 45 years old in December 1777, when British forces under General Howe occupy Philadelphia. The British officers billet themselves in houses throughout the city, including Lydia's. One evening she overhears a British officer discussing the planned surprise attack on Washington's forces at White Marsh the following night. She's not a spy. She has no network. She has no training. She's a middle-aged Quaker woman. She takes a small piece of paper. She writes the essential intelligence, the date, the target, the troop numbers, in the smallest writing she can manage. She rolls it tightly. She sews it inside a covered button, a cloth-covered button of the type used on coats and waistcoats, which she has access to because she's a seamstress, which is one of her household occupations. She attaches the button to the coat of her son, who is 14. She sends her son out of the city under pretext of visiting relatives. Her son passes the button, along with her verbal message about its contents, to an American officer. Washington receives the intelligence in time. The British attack is anticipated. The ambush fails. Lydia Darrah is questioned by the British afterward. She is calm, she's Quaker, she's a housewife. She cannot imagine, she says with complete tranquility, what they think she would know about military affairs. They believe her. She's never charged with anything. Anna Strong. Anna Strong is part of the Culper spy ring, the network of American agents operating in British-occupied New York during the Revolutionary War. She's not a soldier. She's a housewife in Not an Officer. She's a housewife in Setauket, Long Island. Her method is laundry. She hangs her washing on the clothesline. The arrangement of the washing is a signal. A black petticoat hung in a certain position means that a courier is ready to make contact. Handkerchiefs hung alongside it indicate which of several coves he will use for the water transfer. The British soldiers billeted nearby see a woman doing her laundry. They see nothing worth reporting. A code read into the ordinary domestic landscape, a language built out of cotton and hemp, and the ordinary labour of women's lives. None of these women, Lydia Darragh, Anna Strong, the unnamed Scottish Countess, Mrs. Catherine Hartley on Grosvenor Street in 1752, would have described themselves as spies. The word they would use, if pressed, would be something like reliable, or careful, or prudent. The word that actually describes them is necessary. In a world where women have no legal standing, no political voice, no official role in the operations of power, they find the channels that exist. They move through the spaces that men consider too small to bother with. They read the language that men consider decorative. They hide things in the places men consider frivolous, and the information moves. Back to your story now. In January you begin to worry about Thomas, the footman, the watchful one, whose brother works for a Bow Street magistrate. You noticed him in October. You noticed the way his attention tracked Mrs. Hartley's movements in small ways. Nothing obvious, nothing you could point to and say, "Here, this is evidence." Just a quality of attentiveness. A slight, almost invisible orientation toward her, like a compass needle. But it's January now, and the attentiveness has sharpened. He watches when the afternoon gatherings happen. He finds reasons to be in the hall when the women arrive and depart. He asked you once casually, while helping carry things in from a delivery, whether Mrs. Hartley had many close friends. A harmless question. A social question. The kind of thing a servant might ask out of mere curiosity. You said she has many acquaintances, as all ladies of her position do. He nodded. That was all. But you remember his eyes. You tell Mrs. Hartley. She's quiet for a moment. The familiar thinking quiet that you've learned to read as genuine consideration rather than dismissal. How specific was the question? He asked about close friends, whether she has many. Not which friends, not whether particular women visit. Not specifically, but the asking felt deliberate. She's quiet again. Has he been in my dressing room for any reason in the past month, you think? He helped with the coal scuttle 2 weeks ago. The housemaid was ill. The dressing room itself? He didn't go further than the door. She nods slowly. You've been very observant, Sarah. A pause. I want you to do something for me. Not alarming, just watch the rhythm of his day for the next week. When he leaves the house on his free afternoon, how long he's gone, whether anyone comes to speak with him at the back entrance. Another pause. People who are paid to watch develop habits. The watching has its own rhythm. You think he's being paid to report on you. I think it's possible. I think it's worth knowing. Over the following 2 weeks you watch Thomas watching. This is its own kind of education, learning to observe observation, to see not just what someone does but the shape of their attention, the direction of their ears, the way they position themselves in a room. What you find is Thomas leaves the house every Wednesday afternoon, his designated free time, and is gone for approximately 2.5 hours. The route he walks takes him, according to your careful trailing on the third Wednesday, your heart hammering the whole time, every part of you convinced you're about to be caught, takes him past Bow Street before doubling back through Covent Garden. He doesn't stop at Bow Street, but he passes it. You tell Mrs. Hartley. She absorbs this without visible reaction. The next gathering, she says, will not be on the usual day. She moves the gathering. She sends the usual invitations through different channels, using the established methods. She changes which women attend and which don't temporarily. The conversation topics at the next meeting are entirely domestic. A discussion of a new musical entertainment, some social gossip of the kind that appears in every issue of every newspaper. Nothing Thomas would find useful. But she does something else too. She arranges for Thomas to be offered a considerably better position at a house in Berkshire, not through any channel that connects back to her, through her network, through a woman who knows a woman who employs a housekeeper who's been looking for a reliable footman. The offer arrives as a complete surprise to Thomas. Better wages, more responsibility, a larger household. He accepts, naturally. He leaves in February. No confrontation, no accusation, no evidence. Just a better offer arriving at precisely the right moment from a direction that has nothing to do with Grosvenor Street and a problem that quietly resolves itself. Did you arrange that, you ask the morning after Thomas leaves. Mrs. Hartley looks at you with something that might be amusement. I arranged a very good employment opportunity for a young man who had demonstrated himself to be observant and capable. There's nothing improper in that. You think about this. What happens to the information he's already given? He doesn't have enough to be actionable, and the person he was reporting to, if I'm correct about the connection, will shortly have other concerns that will make a footman's observations about a merchant's wife irrelevant. She picks up her morning correspondence. These things have their own weight. Problems don't require force to move. Often they only require patience and the right lever applied at the right moment. She begins reading her letters. You lay out her morning dress. Your hands are steady. They're steadier than they were 6 months ago, you notice. The attic room cot that seemed so foreign now feels entirely ordinary. The city that seemed like a monster now seems like a place you can navigate. Something is changing. March, 1753. You wake before dawn to the sound of voices downstairs. Not the usual household sounds. The cook starting the fires, the maids beginning the morning work. Voices, male voices. Too many of them and too early. You dress quickly in the dark, not bothering with all the buttons. You go to the door. Mary is already in the corridor, her face white under her cap. Men from Bow Street, she whispers. They're in the hall. You pass her and go down the stairs. There are 3 of them. Not the flashy Bow Street runners of public imagination. The men standing in Mrs. Hartley's entrance hall are plainly dressed, carefully ordinary looking. One of them has a document. 2 of them are just standing. Mr. Hartley is present in his dressing gown, his face expressing the specific fury of a man who's been woken before 6 in the morning by people he cannot simply order out of his house. Mrs. Hartley is not yet down. Mr. Hartley, the one with the document, is saying, I do apologise for the hour. The matter requires... The matter, Hartley says with great precision, requires that you return at a civilised hour, with whatever documentation supports this intrusion, and present it to my solicitor. I'm afraid the nature of the warrant. On what grounds? You're standing on the stairs. Nobody is looking at you. You are, like all good servants at moments like this, invisible. Your mind is running very fast. The book, the Defoe, third shelf, third from right in Mrs. Hartley's dressing room. The correspondence, any current letters, would be in the hidden pocket, on her body, which she presumably doesn't have access to right now as she's been getting dressed. But the book, you turn and go back up the stairs, quickly and quietly. The argument in the hall continues behind you. Mr. Hartley has found his voice fully now, and is delivering a speech about English liberties and the rights of citizens that, whatever its political merits, is buying approximately 5 to 10 minutes. You reach the dressing room, you close the door behind you, you go to the shelf. Mrs. Hartley is there. She's fully dressed, more quickly than you'd have thought possible, which means she heard them the moment they arrived and has been dressing in the dark since before you woke up. She's standing perfectly still in the centre of the room. Her expression is unreadable. In her hand is The Fortunate Mistress by Daniel Defoe. There's a loose board, she says quietly, behind the wardrobe. Third from the left. I need you to take this, wrap it in the brown cloth in the second drawer, go through the connecting door to the green room, through the green room to the service stairs, down to the kitchen and into the garden. The loose board in the garden wall, the far left at ground level, put it there. You take the book, it's warm from her hands. Go now, she says, quickly but not running. You go. The brown cloth, second drawer, there it is, a plain cloth used for wrapping delicate items. You wrap the book. You go through the connecting door to the green room, which is a small sitting room that nobody uses in winter. The service stairs are narrow and cold and smell of old wood and lye soap. You descend them as quickly as you dare. The kitchen is warm and smells of bread just beginning and coal smoke. The cook looks up with an expression of complete bewilderment. Garden, you say? Mrs. Hartley needs something from the garden. The cook doesn't question it. You push through the kitchen door into the small walled garden at the back of the house. February has left the garden grey and frozen. The ground is hard under your feet. Your breath clouds in the cold air. The city beyond the wall is muffled and distant. The loose board in the garden wall, far left, ground level. You find it. The wood's slightly different here, darker with age, moving slightly when you press it. You push. The board rotates inward. The space behind it is shallow, maybe 4 inches deep, big enough for a wrapped book. You push the book in. You press the board back. You stand up. You're shaking slightly. Not with cold, though you should be. You came out without a coat, without gloves, in the early March morning. You're shaking because your heart has been hammering for the past 3 minutes in a way that has nothing to do with physical exertion. You go back inside. The kitchen, the service stairs, the green room, the dressing room. Mrs. Hartley is exactly where you left her, standing in the centre of the room. The shelf where the Defoe had been is occupied now by something else. A small Bible moved from its usual position to fill the gap. She looks at you. Done? Done, ma'am. The garden wall, far left, ground level. A pause so short it barely exists. Downstairs, she says. You should have a reason to have been in the kitchen. I went for hot water for your morning wash. That will do. She moves to the door, pauses with her hand on the latch. Sarah, she doesn't turn around. You did very well. She goes downstairs. You find a pitcher. You fill it with hot water from the kitchen. You carry it upstairs. You pass the men from Bow Street in the corridor, being guided by Mr. Hartley. with the expression of a man controlling himself with great effort. They look at you with a brief, professional gaze that takes in young woman, plain dress, pitcher of water, lady's maid, irrelevant. They go into the dressing room. You hear the sound of drawers being opened and closed, the wardrobe doors, the shelves. You stand in the corridor and hold the pitcher of warm water and breathe. 25 minutes later, they come out empty-handed. They examine the green room, the bedroom, the study. Downstairs, they do not go to the garden. Why would they go to the garden? Nothing is hidden in gardens. By 7:30 in the morning, they are gone. Mr. Hartley stands in the hall looking at the closed front door for a long moment. Then he turns and goes to his study without speaking. Mrs. Hartley comes downstairs at 8, precisely for breakfast, as she does every morning. At breakfast she eats her bread and drinks her tea and makes a small remark about the weather. She is calm as a painting. You pour her tea without spilling it. Mr. Hartley dismisses the search from his mind with the efficiency of a man for whom the discomfort has passed, and the lesson is, be more careful with your wife's associations. He says this to her over dinner that evening, with the measured tone of a man who believes himself to be both reasonable and magnanimous. She listens. She nods. She says, "Yes, Edmund." She does not tell him what the Bow Street men were looking for. She tells you the following morning. The warrant, as she was eventually shown by the man with the document, was for correspondence related to certain seditious communications with persons opposed to the lawful governance of the realm. Paperwork relating to the financing of the Stuart cause. The information that led to the warrant was a letter intercepted 6 weeks earlier in Bath, in the correspondence of an elderly man, a distant cousin of Mrs. Hartley's father, one of the older nodes in the network, that contained some material that, when the code was broken, gave Grosvenor Street as a correspondence address. Was the code broken, you ask? Not fully. They understood the letter came here, but not what had moved through here or when. The book cipher isn't broken by finding one letter. You'd need both letters and the key, the specific edition of the book, and they don't have the book. A pause. They didn't find the book. Because it was in the garden wall, because you put it in the garden. Wall. She looks at you. You didn't hesitate. I hesitated for about 3 seconds. But you moved. You think about those 3 minutes, the back stairs, the cold garden, the loose board that your fingers found by feel in the dark. The old man in Bath, you say. Is he? He's being held for questioning. I don't believe they have enough to charge him. She's quiet for a moment. He is 81 years old. He corresponded with my father for 40 years. He sent me a letter every birthday from the year my father died. A pause. He knew the risks. He always knew. That was his choice, made when he was considerably younger and more capable of absorbing the consequences. The fact that it eventually caught up with him is not... She stops. It is not satisfying, but it is not surprising. Everything catches up with you eventually. The network, you say. What happens now? The network rests, for however long is necessary. The corresponding channels close. The gatherings become genuinely social for a period. The book goes back on the shelf when enough time has passed. She pauses. This is how it has always worked. You rest, you wait, you rebuild, and you keep the book. I keep the book. She picks up her morning correspondence, the ordinary post delivered to the door, the letters she can read openly, an invitation to a musical evening, a note from her cousin in Bath about the progress of the confinement, Completely normal, entirely unremarkable. She opens the invitation and reads it, and the expression on her face is of a woman considering whether she'd like to attend a musical evening. You find, standing there in the morning light, that you admire her enormously. In April, the garden wall's loose board is inspected, the coast clear, the old man in Bath released without charge for lack of evidence, and the fortunate mistress returns to its position on the shelf, third from the right. You go up to the roof that same afternoon on the pretext of helping one of the housemaids with something left up there the previous autumn. The roof is accessible from a narrow stair at the back of the house, and it's flat enough to walk on at the centre, where the lead flashing lies between two chimney stacks. London in April. Grey-blue sky with patches of pale sun. Coal smoke risen into a haze that sits over the city like a second roof. The smell of it. And beneath the smoke, the smell of the river. And beneath that, something that is almost, on the very edge of its possibility. Spring. You look out over the rooftops. Grosvenor Street runs below you, a line of matching Georgian facades going east and west. The new development, the formal grid of Mayfair, laid out in the past 30 years with the optimistic regularity of money. To the south, the park, its bare trees just beginning to show green. To the north, the irregular roof lines of older buildings, the city getting more complicated, more layered. The further you look from the orderly new streets, you can see, just, the dome of St. Paul's, 5 miles to the east, rising above everything else, visible from much of the city. They say Christopher Wren designed it so that he wanted it to be the fixed point, the thing everything else orients around. Below you is the city that legally doesn't know you exist. You're 18 years old, nearly 19. You arrived here from a village in Wiltshire with a trunk and your mother's Bible, and a letter of introduction from your aunt. You have learned in 8 months to hide a political document inside a petticoat, to write invisible words on paper, to carry messages through a city in plain sight, to watch a person watching, to move quickly in the dark and find a loose board by touch and keep your hands steady when your heart is hammering. You've learned another language from a fan. You've stood in front of a door you couldn't enter and understood what that means. You've sat in a room full of women talking about the weather and heard the real conversation underneath it. You look at the dome of St. Paul's. This city is enormous. It is complicated beyond any understanding you brought with you from Wiltshire. It contains every kind of life. The merchants at their coffee houses, the women at their tea tables, the gin drinkers staring at nothing, the link boys navigating darkness, the servants running through garden walls on cold March mornings, and underneath the whole visible city, the invisible one. The parallel civilization of women who couldn't own anything, and therefore owned their own methods of operating the world. Their ciphers and their fans and their hidden pockets and their hollow heels. Their networks of conversation that looked like gossip and functioned like intelligence. Their systems of trust that operated without written contracts, without law, without any of the official structures that the visible city ran on. Just trust. Person to person. Woman to woman. Tested over years. It has been running this invisible civilization for as long as the visible one. Probably longer. And it will keep running. It runs on human nature, on necessity, on the simple fact that exclusion from official channels of power does not eliminate the need to exercise power. It just changes the form. The wind off the river is cold still, even in April. Your ears ache. Below you, the street is beginning its evening routine. The carts moving through toward the markets, the carriages of the fashionable returning from their afternoon calls, the servants on their errands, all of it moving, all of it in motion, you among it. You're becoming someone, up here on this roof in April 1753. Someone who is not the girl from Wiltshire and not yet whoever she'll be in 10 years. Something in the making. Something shaped by this city and this house and this mistress and the specific, peculiar education of the past 8 months. You feel it settling into you like the cold of the lead, under your feet, real, permanent, a quality of attention, a way of watching the world. You don't know what you'll do with it yet. You don't know where this particular life goes from here. You're a lady's maid. Your prospects are what they are. But something has been given to you that can't be taken away. And isn't that its own kind of power? A cloud moves. Pale sun touches the dome of St. Paul's and it glows briefly, like something lit from within. The city spread out below you, enormous and indifferent and teeming. You stay a little longer. Let me tell you about some more women while you're up on that roof, because Mrs. Hartley's story is one story among thousands. The tradition she's working in runs deep, and I want you to understand how deep it runs, and how much of it happened in plain sight, in plain language, being looked at and not seen. Lady Mary Wortley Montagu, 1689 to 1762. Lady Mary is possibly the most interesting woman in 18th century England, though she'd have had very sharp things to say about that framing. She is a writer, brilliant letters, poems, essays, a traveller who went to the Ottoman Empire and wrote about it with more accuracy and less condescension than any of her male contemporaries. She introduced smallpox inoculation to England by observing the practice in Istanbul and bringing it home with her in 1721, a move that saved a number of lives and annoyed a significant number of physicians. But here's the thing about Lady Mary that's relevant to our story. She was one of the great practitioners of the semi-coded letter. Her correspondence is enormous, hundreds of letters, many of which survive. The letters she sent freely are brilliant and frank, and still read like they were written last Tuesday. But embedded throughout her correspondence are passages that require context to read, references that look social or literary, but encode specific political positions, specific names, specific arrangements. She was writing to people who knew what she meant. To everyone else, it was just very good prose. This is a different technique than the book cipher or the invisible ink. It's camouflage through quality. Write so well, so clearly, so wittily, that anyone reading over your correspondent's shoulder assumes the letter is purely social. The secret is hidden not in code, but in context. You need to know the reference. You need to understand what she means by our friend's latest venture, or the matter we discussed at Margaret's. She spent much of her later life in Italy, corresponding with her daughter, and through her daughter with a significant portion of English intellectual society, at a safe remove from the social constraints of London. She was also, incidentally, deeply unhappy in her marriage, separated from a man she'd fallen passionately in love with at 20, and spent most of her adult life constructing around herself an independence of mind that the law refused to grant her in any formal sense. Elizabeth Montagu, 1718 to 1800. Don't confuse her with Lady Mary. Different Montagu, same century, different kind of operation. Elizabeth Montagu is one of the founders of the Blue Stocking Circle, the informal network of intellectual women who gathered in London drawing rooms from the 1750s onward for conversation that was deliberately, pointedly, unapologetically intellectual. Literature, history, natural philosophy, economics. The name Bluestocking started as a slight, a reference to the informal dress of Benjamin Stillingfleet, a man who attended these gatherings in blue worsted stockings rather than formal black silk, suggesting the company was not quite respectable. Mrs. Montague and her circle adopted the term with aggressive cheerfulness and made it their own. These gatherings were, among other things, networks. Women like Elizabeth Montagu corresponded with an enormous range of people, writers, politicians, clergy, philosophers, and were at the centre of multiple overlapping circles of influence. They created patronage networks that supported writers. They discussed and disseminated ideas. They maintained relationships that functioned, in practice, as significant political influence even though they had no formal political voice. Mrs. Montagu herself was one of the wealthiest women in England by the 1770s. She owned coal mines, which is not very romantic but is very practical, and she used that wealth with considerable strategic intelligence. She understood that money was one of the very few forms of formal power available to women, and she deployed it accordingly. When she built Montague House at the end of the century, she held an annual dinner for chimney sweeps, these small, soot-covered boys who kept London from burning down, an act of practical charity that also served to put her at the centre of a certain public narrative about benevolence and social responsibility. She was always doing several things at once. The American, Network, Anna Strong, Revisited. I mentioned Anna Strong earlier. Let me give you more. The Culper spy ring was organised by Benjamin Tallmadge on Washington's orders in 1778. Its members included Abraham Woodhull, a farmer from Setauket, Cayley Brewster, who ran boats across Long Island Sound, Robert Townsend, a merchant in New York City, and Anna Strong, whose husband had been imprisoned by the British, and who was, by any external measure, simply a woman managing a farm and a household under occupation. What the British didn't understand, watching Anna Strong hang her laundry, was that they were watching the transmission of military intelligence. The system. Abraham Woodhull would observe British military activity on Long Island. He'd signal Anna Strong through a prearranged system. Anna would signal Caleb Brewster through the laundry code, which cove he should use for the boat crossing to Connecticut. Brewster would carry the intelligence to Tallmadge. Tallmadge would relay it to Washington. Anna Strong was the switchboard, the routing mechanism, the absolutely mundane, completely visible, entirely ignorable housewife whose clothesline was keeping the Continental Army informed. She received no official recognition until after the network was declassified more than a century later. She was never caught. The basic principle distilled. All of these women, Lady Mary, Elizabeth Montagu, Anna Strong, Lydia Darrah, Mrs. Catherine Hartley on Grosvenor Street, are working from the same basic insight. The person who is considered beneath notice does not need to hide. To hide implies concealment, active effort to be invisible. But a woman in 1752 is already invisible to the mechanisms of power. She doesn't need to conceal herself from the law because the law has already looked through her. She doesn't need to keep her correspondence secret from the formal structures of government because the formal structures of government have already decided that a woman's correspondence isn't important. All she needs to do is maintain that assumption. Keep looking like what she already looks like. Keep being the decorative, domestic, entirely unremarkable person that the visible world has decided she is. And in the space that invisibility creates, do the actual work. This is not a perfect system. it fails. Women are caught. The old man in Bath was caught, a little. Anna Strong's husband was imprisoned. Lydia Darragh lived for months under the eye of British officers who ate at her table. But it works far more often than it fails, and the reason it works is that the blind spot it exploits is structural. It's not a gap in one particular system's defences, it's a feature of how power organises itself by deciding what's worth watching and what isn't. Women, for centuries, were decided to be not worth watching. They made extraordinary use of that decision. The months after the search are quiet. Spring becomes summer. Summer is hot and the city smells worse than usual, and you become expert at breathing through your mouth when walking near the river. The gatherings continue but lighter. The conversations are genuinely social for several months. Mrs. Hartley is patient. She has been doing this for years and she knows the rhythm of it, the contraction and the expansion, the resting before the movement. You work, you learn. Your French improves to the point where you can hold a simple conversation and read a simple letter. Your needlework was always adequate. Now it becomes good. You learn to dress hair in 6 different styles and to know intuitively which one is appropriate for which occasion. You learn gradually and without it being formally taught, the network, the women who visit, their names, their households, their particular skills and roles within the wider web of communication. Mrs. Pemberton, who carries things in her brother's parliamentary papers, documents that move through official channels without anyone noticing the unofficial addition. Miss Fenn, who teaches 12 households and serves effectively as a courier between families that can't correspond directly. Lady Forsyth, whose position gives her access to the kind of commercial intelligence that is genuinely useful to people moving money through uncertain channels. You understand now that what you're part of is not primarily political, or not only political. It's more foundational than that. It's women creating the infrastructure of their own agency in a world that doesn't officially permit them to have any. They need to communicate outside official channels because the official channels don't serve them. They need to move documents because those documents would be seized or redirected if they moved them openly. They need to maintain relationships that their husbands would forbid if the husbands understood the nature of those relationships. They're not all Jacobite agents, they're not all spies. Most of them are just managing, doing the practical work of operating in the world with whatever tools the world makes available. And the tools the world made available to women in 1752 were a fan, a hidden pocket, a bottle of lemon juice, a good memory, and each other. Summer becomes autumn. You've been in London for over a year. A letter arrives in October from your mother. She writes in a careful, deliberate hand, the letter slightly larger than necessary, the way people write when they haven't written much and want to be sure they're legible. She asks about your health. She asks about the household. She says your sister is well. She says your father's back is better. She says, I hope the city is treating you well. Your aunt says you're doing good work. You write back with the standard iron gall ink on plain paper by ordinary daylight. You talk about the weather, about your health, about small details of the household that will mean something to her. You do not mention the book cipher or the garden wall or the morning when you heard voices downstairs and dressed in the dark. Some things belong only to where you are. Your sister, reading your letter later, would see a young woman in service, writing to her family, nothing extraordinary. She would not be wrong, and she would not have the full picture. Both things can be true at once. You're learning that. It's one of the more useful lessons. Late October. You're helping Mrs. Hartley prepare for a dinner engagement at a house in Portman Square. The occasion is formal enough for the blue silk gown, the good one with the brocade trim, the one you spend the most time maintaining. The preparation takes over an hour. While you're working, the powder, the hair, the final adjustments, she talks. Not all the time. Just occasionally with the comfortable rhythm of a woman who trusts the person she's talking to. The way you talk when someone is close enough to hear your thoughts and distant enough that you're not quite performing. You know what I owned the day before I married, she says. Tell me, Ma'am. My clothes, specifically enumerated in my mother's will, left to me personally. A small amount of money, £400, held in trust until I reached 21. A set of books my father left me. My correspondence and my relationships. My reputation. A pause. The morning after my wedding I owned nothing. The clothes were Edmund's. The £400 transferred on marriage to him, a legal reality he was entirely within his rights to exercise. The books, technically his property. The correspondence, any letter sent to me he was entitled to open. The relationships, he could forbid them. The reputation, dependent on his good opinion of me. You are pinning her hair. Your hands are steady. Not because he is a bad man. He isn't. He simply understood, as I understood, that this is how the law works, and the law is indifferent to individuals. Did you know, before, you married him? I knew the theory. I understood the legal reality. What I didn't fully understand, she pauses for a long moment, was what it would feel like. What it would feel like to say something and understand that its legal force depends entirely on whether the person you said it to agrees with it. To make a plan and understand that your ability to execute that plan depends on the cooperation, or at minimum the inattention of someone else. To own your own thoughts and nothing else. You finish the last pin. Her hair is perfect. The blue of the gown catches the candlelight and turns something more complex, a blue that almost shifts. This, she says, gesturing vaguely at, you're not sure what, the dressing room, the tools of the work. All of this, the fan language and the hidden pocket and the lemon juice, it's not inherently political. Some of it is in my case. But women who've never carried a seditious document in their lives still need these things, still need some space that isn't visible, some capacity to act in the world that isn't mediated through someone else's permission. She looks at her reflection. It's not rebellion. It's just survival. The minimum necessary to remain yourself in conditions that are designed to make you someone else's property. She stands. She is ready for the evening. She is, from the outside, exactly what a merchant's wife of her class and period should look like. Elegant, composed, appropriate. Do you understand? She asks. I think so, Ma'am. More than when I arrived. You'll understand it more in 5 years, and more again in 20. She picks up her fan, the pastoral one, the ivory one, and pauses. Whatever you choose to do with what you've learned here, whatever form your own life takes, the understanding is useful, not just for the specific methods, but for the principle, the habit of finding the channel that's available to you, of using the space you're in rather than waiting for the space you're not permitted to enter. She moves toward the door. Edmund's carriage is at 8, she says, returning to the ordinary. I'll need the dark police. The temperature's dropping. You get the police. The evening proceeds as evenings do. There are things I haven't mentioned yet. The language of flowers, floriography, is not entirely codified in 1752, though it will be by the 1820s, when the Victorians make a proper system of it. But the use of specific flowers as communicative symbols is older than the 18th century, and women who know each other's gardens, who exchange cuttings and bouquets as a normal part of social life, can use a posy as a message. A cluster of blue violets. Loyalty, faithful attachment. The person who sends them is trustworthy, and the connection is sound. A single rosemary sprig. Remembrance, but also, in certain circles, I have not forgotten the arrangement we discussed. Yellow carnation. Disappointment, meaning here something. Like, the expected document did not arrive. Striped carnation. A striped carnation is actually less specific. The striping was originally associated with refusal, with "I cannot," and it shows up in correspondence of the period as a signal for delay. Not now. Not yet. The flower language is less precise than the fan language, more prone to misinterpretation if the correspondents aren't working from the same understanding. It's supplementary rather than primary. But it has the advantage that a bunch of flowers can travel openly through the front door, delivered by a boy from a flower seller, and attract no suspicion whatsoever. Mrs. Fenn, the mathematics teacher who moves through 12 households, sometimes uses it. A small bunch of herbs included in a gift basket. Functional, natural-looking, entirely unremarkable. There is also music. In a period where women are expected to be accomplished at the harpsichord or the newer pianoforte, musical practice provides cover for a good deal of private communication. A piece of sheet music passed between women at a social gathering has a perfectly natural explanation, and sheet music, if the paper is of the right thickness and quality, can include writing in invisible ink between the staves, indistinguishable from the faint grey pencil marks left by a student who has practised the piece. Sheet music can also be marked with small pinholes, a practice that requires no special preparation, leaves marks easily mistaken for age or rough handling, and can encode messages in a binary system of whole or no whole that predates the digital by a century and a half. Mrs. Hartley doesn't use this particular method. She's not a skilled enough musician, but she explains it to you one evening as an example of the principle. The principle being, use what women do anyway. Use the activities and objects that are already invisibly yours. The needlework, the harpsichord, the garden, the morning visit, the social letter, the borrowed novel. Every ordinary thing is a potential channel. The best codes, she says, are the ones that look so much like ordinary life that they don't need to be hidden at all. By the time your second winter arrives, you're different. Not unrecognizable. You're still Sarah Marsh, still 18 months out of Wiltshire, still sending careful letters to your mother about the weather, but different in ways that are hard to articulate precisely. Your hands know things. The feel of a hidden seam by touch. The angle of a fan held just slightly wrong. The smell, very faint, very particular, of lemon juice that hasn't quite finished drying. The weight of a book that contains a code in the specific, heavy way that significance gives weight to ordinary things. Your eyes know things. How to watch a room without appearing to watch it. How to read the slight shift in Mrs. Hartley's posture that means she's heard something interesting, or the particular stillness that means something is wrong. How to see Thomas the footman whose gone behaviour in whoever comes next. The small signs of attention paid to things that servants don't usually attend to. Your ears know things. the particular quality of silence that follows a sentence left unfinished because someone entered the room. The difference between the silence of a room where nothing is happening and the silence of a room where something is being deliberately not said. You've absorbed the city too, in ways you couldn't have predicted. These streets you walk now without consulting the internal map you use to maintain consciously. The vendors whose calls you know without thinking. The rhythm of the market days and the church bells and the particular slowing of traffic that tells you it's getting toward 4 o'clock on a Friday. You've absorbed the network. You know its shape now. Not all of it, certainly, but enough. The nodes, the channels, the places where information collects and the places where it flows. The women who are deeply in it. The women on the edges who know something is there but aren't fully part of it. The outer circle of women who are simply friends and acquaintances but who serve, without knowing they serve, as cover. The entirely genuine social fabric that makes the operations within it look like nothing more than normal life. In December, Mrs. Hartley asks you to carry a letter directly, not to the penny post, directly, in person, to a house in Bloomsbury where a woman named Mrs. Clare lives with her 2 daughters and her widowed mother. The letter is inside your hidden pocket. The hidden pocket is in the grey wool petticoat that you made yourself from cloth Mrs. Hartley gave you, working by the attic window in the evenings, the stitches close and fine and invisible. You walk to Bloomsbury. It takes 40 minutes. December cold. Your breath making small clouds, the streets slushy with half-frozen mud. You find the house. You knock at the servant's door. You ask for Mrs. Clare's lady's maid. She comes. She's perhaps 25. She looks at you with the same measuring look Mrs. Hartley used that first morning. Mrs. Hartley's house, you say. She nods once. Come in. In the small servant's sitting room at the back of the house, you reach into your pocket and retrieve the letter. She takes it without examining it. She'll know what it contains, you say. The other woman, older than you, more settled into herself, the slightly worn look of someone who's been at this long enough to have stopped finding it remarkable, looks at you. How long have you been with Mrs. Hartley? 1.5 years, she nods. The same assessment the senior apprentices gave you in the first story. Knowing, measuring. You're doing well, she says. You don't know how she knows, but the assessment feels real. You walk back to Grosvenor Street through December London, and the city seems, for the first time, an appropriate size. Not too large, not overwhelming. Just the exact right scale for the life you're living in it. It's evening. The shop is... There is no shop in this story. You're not measuring ribbon. You're not counting coins. But the rhythm is the same. The day's work done. The house settling. Mrs. Hartley and Mr. Hartley at dinner. Their conversation the polite, careful conversation of people who live in the same house and have learned the exact dimensions of each other's patience. You eat supper in the kitchen with the new housemaid. Mary has taken a position elsewhere, a promotion of sorts, a household that needs a more senior servant. And the cook, who is telling a long story about her sister-in-law's argument with a fishmonger that you follow with only half your attention. The kitchen is warm. The fire has been burning all day. The smell is bread and dripping and coal and the faint ghost of all the meals that have been cooked in this room for decades. The stone floor is worn smooth by the feet of all the servants who preceded you. You think about something Mrs. Hartley said to you that first morning. Close the door. Not go away. Not you saw nothing. Close the door and come inside. An invitation. the beginning of an education that has been running for years before you arrived and will keep running for years after you leave. Not a secret exactly, more like a tradition. A body of knowledge passed from woman to woman, practical and patient and built entirely on necessity. You finish your supper, you go upstairs. The attic room is cold. Your breath makes small clouds in the air before your candle warms it a little. The new housemaid is already asleep, or pretending to be. The sounds of the city come through the small window, the taverns, the night watchman, a dog somewhere, the distant bells. You think about Mrs. Clare's lady's maid in Bloomsbury, her measuring look. You're doing well. How did she know? She didn't know you. She'd never seen you before, but she knew your mistress. And she knew what a year and a half in that household meant if you were still there and still trusted. She knew the shape of what you had learned without knowing the details. The network, even at the moment of first meeting, recognizing itself. You pull your blanket up and lie in the dark. How women kept secrets in the 1700s. Here is the full, honest answer. They built a civilization inside a civilization. Not as a political project, though some of it was political. Not as a revolution, though some of it was quietly revolutionary. Mostly as a practical response to a situation that left them with no official channels. They built the fan language in the places where they couldn't speak. They built the hidden pocket in the years when their bodies were being stripped of visible space to carry their own things. They built the book cipher in the libraries where they were permitted to have books but not to act on what they learned from them. They built the networks of correspondence and gossip and carefully social meetings in the drawing rooms where they were permitted to talk as long as they talked about nothing important. And in all of it, the fan, the pocket, the lemon juice, the book, there is something that isn't quite defiance and isn't quite resignation. It's something more pragmatic and more enduring than either of those. It's the recognition that the available space, however small, is still space, that the channel you can use is worth using, that the tools you have are worth mastering, that moving carefully through a world that has decided you're invisible is still moving. The women who burned letters in their dressing rooms before dawn weren't hoping to change the law. They weren't waiting for the vote, which was a century and a half away. They were operating in the world that existed, with the means available, doing what needed to be done. They kept the information moving. They maintained the connections. They protected what was worth protecting. Sometimes that meant a political document inside a silk petticoat in Grosvenor Street. Sometimes that meant a bunch of violets on a doorstep. Sometimes it meant a woman in colonial America hanging her laundry in a particular arrangement, her face completely calm. The British soldiers walking past her garden on their morning patrol, seeing nothing worth reporting. The same basic operation, different tools, different centuries, different stakes. The same invisible architecture. Your candle is burning low. Outside, London is settling into its night version of itself. Never silent, never fully dark, but lower and slower than the daytime city. The church bells somewhere mark the hour. 11 o'clock. No, 12. You lost count. Your body has decided that consciousness is no longer strictly required. The straw mattress that felt wrong for weeks now feels, not comfortable exactly, but yours. The particular dip in it where you've settled over 18 months, your body's impression in it. You close your eyes. Your mind, still active, offers you a sequence of images. Mrs. Hartley at her desk in candlelight, holding a burning letter at exactly the correct distance from her fingers. The cash pocket, the false seam, 2 fingers, exactly the width of a twice-folded single-sheet letter. The fortunate mistress, third from the right, its spine cracked with use. The garden wall, the loose board, cold March morning. The book going in, the board closing, the ordinary view of an ordinary London garden. Lydia Darrah, Quaker housewife, sewing a note into a covered button and fastening it to her 14-year-old son's coat. Anna Strong, hanging her washing. A woman you will never know, in a century you will never see, sitting at a kitchen table, figuring out her own version of the same problem. The same basic problem that has been there for as long as there have been people who get to be visible and people who don't. How do you move in the world when the world has decided your movements don't count? The same answer, always. You find the channel, you use the tools, you move carefully and you keep moving. You're warm enough, fed enough, safe enough. The roof of this house is above you, and the city is below you, and somewhere in this house there is a book on a shelf with 3 other women who own the exact same edition, who can read what you can read, who know what you know. That's not nothing. That is, in fact, the whole thing. Tomorrow there will be more work. There will be more correspondence to deliver, and more mornings to navigate, and more of the endless particular education that is still ongoing, will keep being ongoing for as long as you're here, and probably for some time after. But that's tomorrow. Right now, in this moment, in this attic room in 1753 with the candle burning low and London murmuring outside the window, you're part of something. Not a conspiracy, not a revolution. Something older and more durable than either. A tradition of women who learned to work in the space available to them, who built a language out of a fan, who found the loose board in the wall, who wrote in lemon juice and burned the paper after, who trusted each other with things that the world refused to hold for them officially. You sink lower into the mattress. Your breathing slows. The candle goes out. The room is dark. Just the faint light through the window. London's ambient glow. The city that never fully goes dark. And the sounds of the city doing what it does at midnight. Lower, slower, but still there. Still there. Centuries will pass. The city you're sleeping in right now will change beyond anything you could imagine. The fans will go out of fashion, and the language with them, mostly, though fragments of it survive in old etiquette guides and the occasional historian who notices the pattern. The hidden pockets will move. The specific techniques will change. But the principle, the cash pocket, the space built into the ordinary garment, the hiding in plain sight, will keep evolving with every generation's constraints and every generation's ingenuity. The invisible ink, well, governments will spend 200 years developing and countering methods of invisible writing, and the chemistry will get considerably more sophisticated. But the principle that Ovid knew and Pliny described, that certain substances disappear and reappear under the right conditions, remains constant. The networks. Oh, the networks. They never stop. They just change their channels. The drawing room becomes the telephone, becomes the internet, becomes whatever comes after that. The same basic operation. Women sharing information through channels that official structures consider too small, or too social, or too domestic to monitor carefully. Some things don't change. The need to communicate doesn't change. The need to maintain your own channel doesn't change. The need to find the space that's available to you and use it, carefully and intelligently and without waiting for permission that isn't coming, that doesn't change. Let it all go quiet now. Let the city fade to a murmur. Let the cold attic room be warm enough. Let the morning, the 6 o'clock bells, the coal fires being lit, the horse in the street below. Let all of that wait for its own time. Right now you're exactly where you are, and where you are is inside a tradition, inside a network, inside the invisible civilization that has been running underneath the visible one for longer than anyone has been keeping records. You are Sarah Marsh, and you are 18 years old, and you have learned to write in lemon juice and to find a loose board in the dark and to keep your hand steady when your heart is hammering. The women who came before you did the same in their own versions of this same room, this same necessity, this same patient gathering of tools. The women who come after you will do the same. Some things don't change. Let sleep take you the way it always takes you, slowly, then completely. Let the images quiet. Let your thoughts soften and slow and finally stop. You've been holding things all day. You can set them down now. Everything is where it needs to be. The church bell somewhere in London marks the half hour. You're already asleep by the time it finishes, and the city keeps going, all around you, all night long. And the morning will come when it comes, and you'll be ready. Good night.